Welcome back to Paradise, Louisiana. We're still waiting on Rad Trasher to come in with that breaking news on a tagged fish that was caught. We'll give you that before we leave the show. Gary, right now it's time to resume our governor's question and answer session for sportsmen. This was your idea. We had 6 questions we posed to the 4 major candidates of the governor's office. We met at Drusilla Seafood. We had a restaurant review there, I guess you might call a little bit of a luncheon. Had a room reserved, and all of them came there and responded very well. And we are giving you, the sportsmen, the opportunity to hear their responses to some very important questions dealing with the outdoors. This week, we're going to find out about dedicated funding. A lot of people have been said over the years, past governors have taken money that you, the sportsmen, when you pushed for it and gave your support for taking money from your pocket and putting it for a dedicated purpose, it was used for other purposes. And we asked the governor's candidates, what will you do to protect those dedicated funds?
Was Lyle Johnson, Louisiana Outdoor Writers Association president. Past governors have taken funds that, when created, were sold as dedicated to fishery and wildlife management only, to be diverted for other non-related purposes, thereby breaking trust with the constituents. If elected, will you guarantee not to divert dedicated funding?
Well, without reservation, I can tell you that I think it's poor public policy to take revenues from a self-generated agency, in this particular case, license and fees that are paid for by Louisiana sportsmen, take that, rob Peter to pay Paul to pay for other agencies that perhaps are not as well managed. So absolutely you have my guarantee. But I believe the Louisiana sportsmen really should demand more than just a yes or no answer to that question, because I think it goes a little deeper. There needs to be, I believe, a comprehensive solution. When you stop and think of the fact that Wildlife and Fisheries has been, for decades, a self-generated agency. When you stop and think, and I guess I would say it in another way, they only get to eat what they kill. They've been frugal. It's forced them to be frugal, and they've done a good job. You know, when you take a look at the economic impact of our wildlife and fisheries enterprises that we have in the state, from deer hunting to duck hunting to oyster to fur to alligators, whatever it may be, it's over $2.5 billion a year, and it's silly to me, it's poor public policy to take money that is for that particular purpose of dedicating to manage that enterprise and using it for other things. So absolutely. But in order to be able to do that, in order to be able to make that happen, and again, you know, I was proud in 1987 when we went to a constitutional protection. If you go back and you look, we had a conservation fund going all the way back to 1912. We put it in the Constitution in 1987 to avoid these particular situations that you're talking about. But yet there's still these attempts to rob Peter to pay Paul. And if you take a look at where we've been for the last 25, 27 years, to me it's always been a fire drill after a fire drill. We've got to fix the budget issues that's causing this. And I think what we need to do, we have an outdated budget system, we have an outdated taxation system, and what I would do to make sure that no governor, not me or not any future governor, dips into that particular fund would be to make a structural change. You know, we have a $1.6 billion deficit right now, yet we have the highest non-farm employment we've ever had and the highest gross domestic product we've ever had. When you measure an economy, the 2 most important metrics to measure an economy are the number of people working and the productivity of those people. We're nailing the needle on both of those. We're pegging the needle on both of those, and yet we have a $1.6 billion deficit. So if we keep doing the same thing, we keep getting what we got, we've got to change that. I would call legislators immediately into a special session, and we would work to come out with a fair, transparent, and competitive tax code that allows our economy to be stimulated and at the same time provide state government leaders with the resources they need to take care of the core functions of education, healthcare, and transportation. And absolutely, absolutely, let us be the generation that says, you know what, when you take care of your business, when you take your own nickels and you put them aside and you frugal with them, there shouldn't be a penalty for having some nickels left over, and here comes the long arm of the government and taking it away from our sportsmen and doing other things with it. I'm not a callous person. I believe all those other things are very, very important. But we have a system that has worked for wildlife and fisheries. It's caused them to be frugal, and I don't think they should be penalized for it.
Yes, and it's not just past governors, it's the present governor who's really made a regular habit of it, and we've seen it in every area of government. As a lieutenant governor, I have certainly experienced it in our department. I'm in charge of culture, recreation, and tourism for Louisiana. Tourism is a big business for the state. Last year, we had a record-breaking year, more than 28 million people coming to Louisiana. They spent over $11 billion while they were here, and they left behind $836 million in state sales tax revenue that no Louisianians paid. That's a dedicated source of money that we get for tourism, yet I've had less money than any of my predecessors because of the intrusion on those dedicated funds. So I've experienced firsthand exactly the problem that Wildlife and Fisheries has faced and other departments have faced. You talk to agriculture, you talk to other areas, dedicated funds have been the source, particularly of this governor, to go balance a budget with one-time money that's servicing recurring needs. That's what's wrong with our budget situation right now. We've used one-time sources of money, and we've taken from dedicated pots of money in order to keep maintaining government at the level that it is right now, and that's wrong. We need to prioritize spending in Louisiana. We need to leave dedicated funds in the pots to which they have been intended all along, and it certainly holds true in Wildlife and Fisheries that is tremendously dependent, obviously, on self-generated funds from license fees and others, and the mineral revenue that they get and some of the federal acts that have provided an income flow to them. But Wildlife and Fisheries is in a very vulnerable position if and when a governor starts taking their dedicated monies. I want the dedicated monies for Wildlife and Fisheries to stay in Wildlife and Fisheries.
Yes, I can absolutely guarantee not to divert dedicated funds when they come from special fees and assessments in order to promote wildlife and fisheries in Louisiana. In 2009 and 10, those 2 years together, the state of Louisiana, through the budget process, actually diverted $44 million away from the artificial reefs. That resulted in a constitutional amendment that the people of Louisiana passed. I think it was 57% of the vote last year in November of 2014 to constitutionally protect those funds. And as you know, those funds are paid by the oil and gas companies. In lieu of bearing the expense of removing the rigs that are inactive, they pay the money to the state. So the money was only collected for that specific purpose, and it's certainly one of those dedications that we ought to make sure stays in place so that we can have that reef out there and have the environment that we need to promote the fisheries and get the fish count to where we want it to be. It kind of plays hand in hand with the management, the regional management, so that we have the fish population that we would want to have. But it's not just the dedicated funds that promote wildlife and fisheries that have been raided over the last several years. We've had a very irresponsible ad hoc piecemeal approach to the budget for the last number of years. I don't think you'll find a legislator who's voted against more budgets than I have over the last 7 years because I have opposed that way that we've been budgeting has been very, I think, irresponsible. It's led to a structural budget deficit of $1.6 billion this year because we never bit the bullet and made the changes that we needed to make to have a sustainable budgeting process. But I can absolutely guarantee that as governor, I will not divert away from dedicated funds that are there to promote wildlife and fisheries in Louisiana.
I would absolutely use all of that funding for its intended purpose. And the reason we need to do that is simple. We're in a fight for our very survival. This isn't a luxury. This isn't a trivial issue. This is about the survival and vitality of Louisiana, particularly coastal Louisiana. And if we don't start turning the corner with regard to coastal restoration, in a few years it's going to be too late. So for that reason, we absolutely need to use all of those funds for their intended purpose. That's the pact we made with the voters. That's also how we sold our action to the federal government in getting what was previously federal funds for the effort, like royalty sharing. I was very involved in that effort as a member of the delegation. I can tell you, I personally made that argument. We're dedicating state resources. We need the feds to help match that effort. If we all of a sudden, having gotten some significant royalty sharing, reverse course, that would really set us back at the federal level. Already, as you know, President Obama is trying to reverse that royalty sharing. I'm fighting that. The rest of our delegation is fighting that. I'm very hopeful we will block that effort. However, at the state level, if we were to use what is supposed to be coastal funds for completely unrelated purposes, that would set us back in that effort to fight to retain and expand federal revenue sharing.